Well, I'm just going to assume that we have started because it looks like we have. So thank you so much for joining me tonight, Seb. I appreciate it. It was a late notice. I literally reached out to you today, and you said that you're going away for two to
Yeah,
3 weeks after this, after tonight. So tonight was the only option unless we were to wait 3 weeks. So thank you so much.
thanks for the invite. Happy to be here.
Awesome, man. Well, look, let's just get straight into it. I just want to know a little bit about who you are. So, for people that don't know who you are, and maybe more, and maybe some information for me too, because I don't know you completely, man. Like, I don't know your backstory and activism
Yeah,
and your journey to veganism. But just yeah, give me a brief overview of who you are.
yeah. So my name is Seb. I'm born and raised in Lebanon. I've been vegan for a bit longer than 10 years now. Um, and before that, I was vegetarian for 8 years. I went vegetarian because a friend of mine was showing me, basically pointing out my hypocrisy and claiming to be an animal lover while not only eating but also hunting animals. So my friend at the time was vegetarian. So when she showed me footage of what happened inside slaughterhouses, I thought I should come up with a really, really good argument now as to why I want to continue contributing to that type of suffering that I was causing. And I couldn't come up with an argument. So I felt like I would therefore have to either be a hypocrite or a vegetarian. So I went vegetarian again as simply because I didn't have more information about veganism. And for 8 long years, I was vegetarian. I remember the first vegan I met, I had forgotten about this story until a friend of mine reminded me. Um, I was in Armenia when I was 18 years old, so I was already vegetarian for 2 or 3 years at the time, I don't remember. And in the capital of Armenia, there's a place called it's called, they call it the waterfall. It's a bunch of stairs that if you walk up, it takes like 15 to 20 minutes. Like it takes a long time to reach the top. And then if you reach the top, you get a really nice view of the city. So first thing in the morning, a friend of mine went there to walk up, watch the sunrise, see the city. It's really nice. And there was this old man running up and down the stairs nonstop, like training. And it took us, like, we got tired going up, this man's just like going at it. At the end, he sat down. He was resting, and I told him, like, hey, can you tell me, why are you doing this? And he said, you see that mountain over there? And facing this place, there's this massive mountain called Mount Ararat, which historically was part of Armenia, but after the genocide, it became part of Turkey. So he said, I'm going to climb that mountain. Now, this is one of the highest peaks in the world. Like, it's no joke to climb Mount Ararat. And I told him, wow, and like, have you done this all your life? Or like, you seem to be really fit. I said, do you mind if I ask you like how old you are? He said, I'm actually 60 years old. 2 years ago, he said, when I was 58, as a medical doctor, I was overweight and I was unhealthy and I had some health conditions. And I decided to change my life and I became a vegan. And now I'm training and I've lost all that weight and I'm in better shape and I'm going to climb that mountain. And I thought, wow, you're vegan. Where'd you get your protein from? I literally
Typical.
said that to yeah, to a doctor. And he laughed. He said, don't worry, all the protein that you need can be found in plants. That was the first vegan I met. But that's all the conversation we had. We didn't have any conversation about ethics or anything.
Yeah.
And years after, I was wondering why, as like an adult human, I'm drinking breast milk from other animals. So not even human breast milk, right? It's the breast milk from another animal. And I Googled it and I came across a documentary called Earthlings. And I watched Earthlings and I immediately got suggested another video to watch on YouTube called 101 Reasons to Go Vegan or something like that.
Yeah.
And then I finished watching that and I got suggested another video, which was a Gary Yourofsky speech. So I watched that. And then I watched a documentary called, I think, When a Tree Falls, about the Earth Liberation Front. And then I watched one called the Behind the Mask Animal Liberation Front. All of this in one day. And I was like, wow, now I have to give up dairy as well.
Yeah.
or or I have to just keep it a secret that I found all these things and just lie to myself and continue being a vegetarian. So I went vegan at the time, and a year later I saw photos of activists in the metro in London doing this activism type called the Earthlings experience. And I lived in Barcelona at the time, so I found out some activists were doing that as well, and I joined them, and that's how I became an activist.
Awesome, man. Thank you so much for that. I'm just going to make sure everything is working for people. So someone's saying it's better now because I was having a little bit of echo on my end. So I'll just get them to make sure that is the case now that I'm talking as well. But I think yours is all good. So I'll just ask you another question then. So leading on from that, so that was your journey towards into veganism, and yep, audio is all good. Awesome. So tell me about when you first began activism and what sparked that for you, and where did you start? Like, what was it like being a beginner activist?
Yeah. So the first thing I started was that Earthlings experience kind of event in Barcelona. We went into the metros, we would hold the laptops, show videos of Earthlings, and then we had flyers. So we wouldn't engage in conversations, we would just give out flyers with information. And eventually the group I was doing that with, it just fell apart. And some time passed, and I saw at the time Anonymous for the Voices had started in Australia, and eventually it started having chapters around the world. So I started the chapter in Barcelona. So we started organizing the events there, and with the help of other activists, we started the Save Movement chapter as well. So we started organizing vigils. A friend of mine started organizing direct action everywhere type, like protests and things like that. I did that for, I would say, I think maybe a bit longer than a year. At the time, my background is architecture. I have a master's in architecture. And so I worked in a company. I quit my job, decided to start just doing activism with the hope that I would get enough like support to do it. I started a Patreon page, and it worked out for the best, actually. I thought, like, if it doesn't work, it's fine. I can just go back to working any other job. And if it does, great. I can dedicate all of my time for activism. And shortly after that, well, not shortly, actually, I did that for a few years. And after that, I had severe burnout because it was quite intense with all the events. And I took a break for a few months, and then I got an invitation to give lectures on animal rights and veganism. And that was 5 years ago. For the past 5 years, I've been mostly concentrating on giving lectures in universities and schools around the world on animal rights, ethics, philosophy of like morality and things like that.
Yes.
And 2.5 years ago, I founded the Middle East Vegan Society, which is an organization, non-profit organization that raises awareness about animal rights in the Middle East and North Africa, using education with the public and corporate outreach with companies. So we raise awareness about the issue for consumers, and then we work with companies to make it easier for consumers to consume plant-based diets.
Awesome. Wow. It's quite a journey. You've tried out so many different methods, and that just the description you've given me, and of all the different forms of activism you have done. I don't know if you did say this. I could be wrong. What was the timeline of going vegan and then into activism? What was the gap there?
1 year.
1 year
after
okay.
I became vegan, I started doing.
Yeah. Okay. Interesting, man.
I mean, I wish it was more on the spot, but took me some time to realize that being vegan was not enough.
Yes. I mean, that was the same for me. I think I went vegan around the age of 17. I was in year 12, and there was a few things that sparked it for me. It was, I saw a bit of Earthlings around the age of 11. I think I was just scrolling through Facebook, and I just happened to see a clip. Yeah. I just happened to see a clip of Earthlings, and it hit me hard. I remember feeling like, holy shit, that is crazy. Like I was an animal lover, like most people, or at least cared for animals. I I wasn't. I knew animal cruelty was wrong.
Yeah.
Even at that age, most kids are like that. But I remember telling myself that this is something that I have to do. It's a necessary evil because I need it to survive. So I just didn't think there was a way around it, essentially. Even though my mum was
Yeah.
vegetarian, um, I don't know why I didn't really connect that dot. Maybe, I don't know. I think because my mum even thought that it was necessary. She didn't even have the knowledge of nutrition. She was just doing it, vegetarianism, even if it was detrimental to her health. She didn't know, but she was just doing it anyway. Um,
Wow.
yeah.
Is she
Anyway,
vegan now?
yeah, she's vegan now. So then it was actually my mum coming home. Oh no, my sister coming home, who was 4 years younger than me when I was around 16, and she would have came. This was probably when she was 12 or even 11. Actually, I'm not sure. And she just came home and she was like, "I'm going vegan." She just told my mum she's going vegan, and we were like, "What? That's crazy." Um, and my mum was like, "I don't know what I'm going to feed you. I think you're going to die." And she was already vegetarian, so it was literally just the dairy and eggs probably. But she came around to it. My mum went vegan probably 3 months later, and I think that had an effect on me. Like I remember seeing that as a really admirable thing. Like I was like, especially with the Earthlings footage in my mind, like that's something that never left me. I remember how I felt.
Yeah.
Knew it was wrong, but I just told myself that I needed to, blah, blah. I don't know what really was going through my head at that time, but it was about a year that I remember sitting down in front of a steak that my mum had actually cooked me. She was still doing that. I don't know if she was truly in it for the ethics, if she was still cooking it in the house, but I don't know what was going through her head either. But I do remember seeing that in front of me and being like, actually, no, I'm not. I don't want you to cook this for me anymore. I remember saying that, and it was so hard for me to verbalize that out loud. It was like, oh, I'm losing so much here. But anyway, from that point on, it was a bit of a transition for me. I didn't just go vegan at that point, but I would say around 8 months later, I was vegan. And then it was seeing footage such as like I remember seeing a James Aspie speech, documentaries like What the Health and Cowspiracy, and that's really what kind of fueled it from that point on. And then my mum was actually first to go out and do a Cube of Truth. And then I came along with her after being convinced, and then I went into DXE and so forth. And then I eventually met Tash. And this was only 2019, I would probably say I started activism. So what? It's still 5 years. It's gone bloody quick.
Yes.
It's crazy. And it's funny because I actually remember there must have been one event that you came for to Perth. Do you remember what that was around 2019? It was the Vegan Expo, wasn't it?
Yes. Yeah. It was 5 years ago. It was a vegan expo. Yeah. The only
Wow.
time I was in Perth. Yeah.
So that was literally when I started activism, and I remember you there because we went to a vigil. It was a chicken vigil. Um, it was you, Leah Dollinger. Um,
It's true.
yeah, I can't remember who else was
Yeah.
there. There was a few other names, but
Yeah. There was one activist from the States. Her name's Liz.
yep,
Liz Jones, Elizabeth Jones. There were a few activists, I think, from Melbourne, Joanne.
yep.
I think another one. Well, the founder of the sanctuary in Brisbane, um, Unchained, Death Row Unchained. She
Oh
was there as
yes,
well, I
yep,
think.
yep. Wow, that's pretty cool, man. 5 years. Wow, it's half a decade.
Yeah.
um, but yeah, no, that's awesome, man.
Yes.
Yeah, well, I think that really does cover your activism story thus far. I mean, what are you working on right now? Like, what are your current goals and what projects?
Yeah. So I really think that I guess like one thing I learned throughout those years is as a movement, we often, um, it, like working as an individual is overrated and working as groups or as a movement is underrated. That's what I've learned to
Yep.
realize. So at the moment, I'm trying to do more things as an organization with Middle East Vegan Society, because then the impact that you have is obviously like one person can reach a lot of people, and being like an individual person working on things can have its benefits as well. So it has its place. I personally realize there's no organization doing any work in all of the Middle East. I'm from the Middle East. Like there are amazing activists in the rest of the world. They can concentrate in their areas, and I can concentrate on the Middle East and North Africa, and also help them reach the Middle Eastern populations within their countries. So one of the things we worked on recently that I was really excited about was the Vegan Islam Initiative.
Yep.
It's basically like more than a year-long research that our team did. I'm not Muslim myself, but we have a lot of obviously Muslim vegan activists in the Middle East. So they worked on this initiative. It's a resource of a breakdown of the religion of Islam. Explains like everything in relation to other animals, and then the goal is to show that not only is veganism compatible with Islam, like you can be a vegan and a Muslim at the same time, which unfortunately is a misunderstanding. People think that you can't. So not only can you be a vegan as a Muslim, but based on the scripture, based on the religion, it's actually favorable to live that way. And this is really important because obviously, since we're doing work in the Middle East, we want this guide to be there, but we've prepared flyers for other organizations to print and use in their outreach effort in the rest of the world, because obviously Muslims are all around the world. You know, you don't only meet Muslims in the Middle East. So actually, a lot of people have asked me when I used to do a lot of street outreach, like, oh, what do you say when a Muslim talks about halal slaughter and this and that? You know, like, well, now we have a full like resource for that. We have a flyer. You don't even have to learn everything. Just print a flyer, pass it on, you know, have them check out the website. So this was one of the things we've been working on recently. We're working on changing or influencing the dietary guidelines of Saudi Arabia to lean more towards plant-based, and dietary guidelines are important because everything from hospitals to school canteens can change if you have an impact on the dietary guidelines. So it's work in the background, but when the result is reached, then you get a lot of impact on the lives of animals. We provide like translation services to organizations worldwide to have their content in Arabic as well, for like for any person who lives in their country but would rather read their information or resources in Arabic. And yeah, I mean, we do lectures as well. I give lectures. We have other team members who also give lectures, and that part is obviously lectures in the Middle East, North Africa, but also in the rest of the world, because there's this unfortunate idea that veganism and animal rights is only for white people. And so when someone who's not white walks into a university to give a lecture on animal rights, people conceive it in a different way, because they're like, oh, okay, well, obviously already, you know, like, they realized that they were wrong about one thing, you know. And unfortunately, like, people would sometimes like comment on social media, you know, like when I upload content, they're like, oh, what about children dying in Syria? Yeah. I'm like, yeah, dude, that's like 1 hour from my house. Like, yeah. Tell me what I can do now to change that, and I'll do it. And until then, I will tell you what you can do to change the impact that you have on the lives of other animals.
Yeah. Oh, sorry, man. I think you've just cut out. For anybody that's just rejoining, I had my internet cut out and it's just literally stopped the live stream. So let's try to start back where we just were, and hope that doesn't happen again. But I am recording, so I will post the conversation in full on my account after anyway. So I can't remember exactly where you were at though, man. Maybe you can just give it a go. We were definitely talking about the Middle East society, so.
Yeah, so I was saying we worked on the Vegan Islam Initiative. We're working now trying to influence the Saudi dietary guidelines. So the dietary guidelines in Saudi Arabia, to make them lean more towards plant-based eating. Obviously, if we could just make it fully plant-based, but when it comes to policy and stuff, it takes much. It's a long game, and yeah, we're doing all kinds of work in that way. We're also going to hopefully try doing some dietary guidelines outreach in the UAE, so the United Arab Emirates, and also just raise awareness for people in the Middle East to know that this is not like strictly like a Western thing. If anything, like, most Middle Eastern cuisine is actually predominantly plant-based. So one of the easiest places to be vegan for me is actually in the Middle East, because of the traditional food there. And yeah, we also give lectures. I'm not the only one on the team who gives lectures. We have a few members doing that, and the goal for that is also to not just reach university students, but also show that these lectures can be given by activists who are not, like, let's say, from Western countries, because a lot of people tend to believe that, oh, it's just like a white people thing. It's like,
Yeah.
no, actually, like there's people who care about animal rights all around the world. So
Absolutely.
we're trying to combat that as well.
Yes. No, that is pretty awesome to hear, man. Like you are doing a lot right now and you're thinking from the bigger picture, and I like what you said at the start that you're trying to move towards big projects, working with many people, bringing people together as opposed to just working independently. Now, I do see that. I
Yeah.
mean, I see the worth in doing that because if we want to create big change within society and within the world, we have to work together, and working as a team can be very synergistic in that way. Like, you know, 1 + 1 = 2, but actually if we start expanding that, you actually can do exponential work, I believe. So I mean,
Yeah. Yeah.
what do you think would be the ideal, like, okay, this can kind of get right into the topic of effective activism. Like, what do you actually class as effective activism? Like, what do you think is effective, quote unquote? What should people be doing?
I can definitely say that I don't know what is the most, but I think I can assume that the most effective is political, because
Sure.
when you pass laws like that, that's the ultimate goal, right? Like when you change the status of animals from commodities to people, to persons, and they get individual rights. That is the ultimate goal. That's what we're trying to reach as a movement. That's why it's called the animal rights movement, because we're trying to get rights for other animals.
Absolutely.
So obviously, yeah, political work is very important. I know, like I've interviewed uh, politicians who are doing work in the animal rights area, including from Australia. There's an amazing politician. I forgot her last name, but I'm pretty sure her first name was Emma.
Emma Hurst.
Emma Hurst.
Yes.
Emma Hurst, yeah. I interviewed her a few years ago, just because like it's so like it's so amazing how they do that work, and then the second it works, like the impact that it has is
Absolutely.
almost always immediate, and it's long lasting, right? Now the bad side about laws is that they can always be like, they can go back on it, right? Or they can just not be respected, and the government is not doing any effort to make sure it's being respected. But still, sometimes some laws, when it comes to politics, have actually massive impact. So I do personally think that so far the most impactful way of changing this, in my opinion, would be politics. Does that mean everyone should do politics? Absolutely not. I can't say that. I can't even do politics. It's just I don't have it in me, but we have people on the team who do it. We have people who are getting involved in the dietary guidelines of entire countries. That's one of the nice things about working as groups. Like, I may not be able to do that, but I may find someone, like the team member that we have, a vegan woman in Saudi Arabia who her profession is in the health industry, and she's a health professional, so she has all the contacts, she has all the knowledge, and she can do that. And different people can do different things, and when we work as a group, I think like that's already like a very effective part as well, when you work as a group.
Yes.
Other things that I find really effective is, for example, finding something that the majority of the public agrees on already and pushing it all the way forward, right? So when you take examples of, I don't know, like let's say a dolphin park, they were imprisoned all their lives. A lot of people from the public would be with you if you say, hey, let's sign a petition to get this closed down.
Sure.
I think that's effective. I also think it's effective because once you reach the goal, you can then use logical consistency to fight for other animals.
Yes.
So you say, oh, well, we just did this with dolphins and you all agreed. Well, what's the moral difference between doing it to a dolphin and then you check what's the next cause you can go for, So small wins like this, I think, are very effective. I think university spaces are very effective because that's where the next generation is at as well.
Absolutely.
There's one organization doing that work called ASAP, Animal Scholars for Animal Protection. They're doing that kind of work in universities, doing events and things like that, getting animal rights clubs. What else I think is effective? I think grassroots is effective to build community.
Yeah.
What I would like to see is more of a merge of the corporate organizations with the grassroots movement. And what I
Sure.
mean by that is, for example, if we take a specific big organization, like let's say PETA, they're a very big corporate organization, right? So what I would like to see is, for example, or I would like to see more of, is, for example, PETA doing their corporate work and then connecting with the grassroots activists and say, hey, we need you on the streets while we do this in the offices, right?
Yeah.
Because at the moment I see a big gap between the grassroots activists and the corporate activists. And I think if we can just connect more and let each other know, like, hey, we can help you out, we're here, just let us what you're working on in the offices and we'll make sure we do the work on the streets.
Yeah.
I think that would be effective as well.
Yeah. So that's kind of coming
These
back
are
to.
just a few things.
Yeah, so I guess to summarize what you said there, you started off with the most effective form of activism, I think logically in relation to animal rights would be politics because, yes, as you said, like that is the end goal. We want to make it illegal to exploit animals, I mean we could get into the specifics of exactly what the laws should be, right? But maybe we can soon, but essentially that is the end goal because legality is really what is going to create the most change. I mean, in the case of human rights, there are people that would violate human rights every day if they could, but the consequences are too high, and that's the ideal,
Yes.
right? So
Yes.
yeah, and look, if there weren't laws, well then we would have to be doing all the same thing for human rights because there'd probably be a lot of people violating human rights. So yes, I do agree with that. But then, you did say that, well, look, politics isn't for everybody though because we just aren't cut out for it. Maybe that's not where our skills and our interests are. So why pour yourself into something that's just not going to come naturally to you? Or even if you study, you're just not going to be interested. That makes complete sense. And this is something that I always do say. Like, I think as activists, you need to find the thing that you have the interest in, you can develop the skills in, or if you have the skills, put your skills into a particular area. What I do say, though, that needs to be consistent amongst all animal rights activists is the core message. Understanding what it actually means to be an animal rights activist. What does it mean to be vegan? What does animal rights mean? So no matter what you pour yourself into, do it fully, but do it with the right message, the right core message. And that's what I kind of want to ask you now. What do you think that core message is? Like, how could we define it simply? Is there a core message, or is it kind of a bit vague at this point in time? Like, what do you think the core message is?
Yeah, that's interesting because I actually shared a video a couple of months ago about this. I didn't portray it as this is the core message, but I was just sharing my opinion. And a lot of people got upset about it, but I still haven't heard a single argument against it. I think the core message should be a message of consistency. So when you want to change something in society or even in an individual, it's much easier to show that they already hold that value. It's easier for
Yes.
them to realize you're not bringing
Sorry,
in
2
a
seconds.
new ideology.
Let's get shut this door.
Yeah.
People are now. All right. Yep. Continue.
Yeah. So I really think that it's much easier to change society or individuals if you make them realize that what you're sharing with them is a value they already hold, rather than them thinking that you're bringing in a new ideology. Because when it's a new ideology, that's where like they put up their walls, like, I don't want to hear about this. This is changing our ways, our traditions, etc., etc. The best way to make the case for animal rights, I think, is by using a message of consistency as an extension of the philosophy and the laws of human rights.
Yeah.
Okay. So the reason I say this is because no one in their right mind would want to say out loud that they are against human rights, right? Some people can be, but no one would say it proudly and think that they're making a good argument. And if they do, most people would immediately side with you, because why would you side with someone who's against human rights? So the core message, in my opinion, would be much stronger if we just said, all right, You believe in human rights. Amazing. Why do you believe that? Is that because all humans are the same? No, they're not, because we're not. We're obviously not the same. But the differences between us are morally irrelevant differences. So it doesn't matter that we're not the same, as in your hair is a certain way, mine is another, your skin color is different than mine. These are morally irrelevant differences. However, we both should have the same human rights, because those differences are morally irrelevant. So that's the message of human rights. The same message, all you have to do is ask someone, can we extend the same logic onto other animals, right? We're not the same, we're very different from each other. However, the differences between us and other animals are morally irrelevant differences. Therefore, other animals also deserve basic like moral rights. So if you make the case like this, if you make the core message of animal rights like this, which by the way is not something I came up with myself, but if you make it like this, how can anyone in their right mind try to argue against that?
Yes.
Because you're making a moral consistency question out of human rights. So I think this is quite a powerful, at least the most powerful approach that I've learned so far. Because for someone to disagree with that, they would have to come up with an argument that also disagrees with human rights.
Yes.
And most people wouldn't go that way.
Very good point, and I do agree with you fully there. I mean, you would think it would be easy to just define the vegan definition and try to explain by that why that's wrong. And I don't know if there is just a vegan definition. I know you can look at the Vegan Society, but look, it's not as simple as that. And I think what you're saying makes a lot of sense. It's literally just trying to create logical consistency between human rights and animal rights. And this is something that I've started doing recently. It's essentially name the trait, right? You're just naming the trait that why would you not extend it?
Yeah.
You know, like what is the moral, the significant difference between us to why you wouldn't do it, you know, essentially, because there is no significant difference. So something I've recently started doing is I start with the question, are you in favor of human rights? And most people are. Like you said, most people would not say they aren't. And if they do say that they're not in favor of human rights, well, first of all, it's just not going to look good, but most people don't. And then you can get into the whole question of that. I'm sure that will just take the conversation elsewhere if you want to actually go. But yeah, you start with that question. You can assume that most people are going to say, yes, I am in favor of human rights. But then I don't stop there, and I try to get, why are we in favor of human rights? Why should we not violate the rights of other humans, exploit them, harm them, murder them, etc.? And you know, they'll say certain kind of not getting to the core of it. They might say something like, because we should all be treated equally, or we don't, you know. Okay, sure. Why should we be treated equally? You try to get deep, and you fundamentally what you want to do is you want to get to the point that as humans, we're sentient beings. We don't want to suffer. We want to avoid suffering. We want to maximize our well-being as much as possible, and we want to live our life freely, essentially. And why is that? Well, it's because, yes, we're sentient. Fundamentally, it's because we're a sentient being. We have a subjective experience. And you can get people to agree on that. They might not have thought that deeply before, but you absolutely can if you guide the conversation, I think. And then from there, you can ask. So for that, and then you can clarify even further. So it's not because of intelligence. It's not because of skin color. It's not because of the way you look. And then you can make that logical extension. So based on that reason, would you not then grant animal rights for that exact same reason? And if they're a logically consistent person, they'll say, yes, you should. And I did have a conversation the other day, you may or may not have seen, and the guy said, yes, I am in favor of animal rights, 100%. Awesome. That's you want to get there straight away, but sometimes that's not going to be the case. And they're going to bring in another factor that they didn't bring up for the humans, but now they're bringing it up for animals. So now the excuses can come in and you can deal with those excuses. But that's when you can instantly point out, well, that would actually be a contradiction because you just said this is the reason you grant human rights for sentience, essentially. But you're not granting animal rights for sentience, who are sentient, you know. So I think that's a really good way to go about it because that is the core message fundamentally. It's just animals deserve the rights just like humans do. So, yeah, I mean, would you say that is the type of approach that most vegans should be considering when having conversations with people, or do you think there are other ways to go around it?
I think, in my opinion, it's the most bulletproof way of having a conversation about it. Unfortunately, some people say that if you do this, then you're making animal rights about human rights, which you're not. You're just using somebody's already existing values about human rights
Yeah.
to make the logical consistency test about animal rights.
Yes.
And to be honest, like, it's in our favor that this type of conversation exists, that this logic exists, because imagine if the animal rights message did not go hand in hand with human rights. Like, then it would suffer, like, it would be even more difficult to get
Yes.
people to realize that they're being inconsistent, right?
Yes.
But if they realize that I believe in this thing, if I want to be consistent, I should also believe in the other. That is the best thing that can happen to you in any argument, not like, or any conversation or debate, to get someone to realize that the only thing lacking here is consistency. So you're
Yes.
not bringing in a new ideology. You're not bringing in like a new school of thought or anything, or like trying to make a weird case about something specific. You're literally just saying, hey, you already believe in this. You just admitted you believe in human rights. So like,
Yes.
name the trait or accept that they deserve basic moral rights as well.
Yes, and fundamentally, you're getting people to recognize the trait that is important is sentience, right? And
Yeah.
and if you can get people to agree to that, well, then you can call it human rights, you can call it animal rights, or you can call it sentient rights if you like. But fundamentally, it's recognizing that individuals who are having a subjective experience, who feel pleasure and pain, who want well-being and want to live life freely, deserve to have those interests protected. And that's what a right fundamentally is. It's a protected interest, right? And then we can legally recognize that and go forth from there. But there are some people, and this happens often, who just accept that they are logically inconsistent and, oh well, I'm just going to go on living life as a hypocrite. What do you have to say to people that are just left in that position? So yes, we have this conversation with somebody, we get them to recognize that if they're not going to actively grant animals rights in their life, well, then you're a hypocrite based on the fact that you are in favor of human rights because they're sentient. But I don't care enough. I just don't care about not being a hypocrite. Like, how do you tackle that?
Yeah. I just drop it there. To be honest, I don't see the point in trying to argue with someone who already agreed with animal rights, just because they'd rather be a hypocrite, because you can find the same in human rights as well.
Yeah.
A lot of people agree with human rights, and a lot of people contribute to human rights violations out of lack of caring, or they just rather be the hypocrite, you know? So therefore, I found it much easier to have the conversation until they agree with the rights message. Once they agree, I now make the new consistency test, like, therefore, you would be a vegan, right?
Yeah.
And then if they agree with that, great. If they don't, like, well, they can't disagree that you should be vegan if you believe in animal rights, because that would be weird. Why would you believe in rights and then think that it's okay to violate those rights?
Yes.
But if they say, no, I agree, but I'm not willing to do the effort, I'll move on to the next person.
Sure.
You're not gonna, like, there's so many people who are still waiting to hear the message. There's so many people who would change, that you're wasting your energy. You're probably going to burn out if you try to make every single person you talk to go vegan.
Sure.
And you're just going to waste your time, because they've already made it clear that they don't mind being hypocrites. And I can respect someone being a hypocrite as long as they accept the fact that they're being hypocrites, and that they are wrong in their actions, and that they do believe animals should have rights. Another thing you have to keep in mind is that we're never going to make the world go vegan by individual conversions, right? That's just impossible, because if you look at the growth ratio of the population, like, thousands of vegans worldwide should be converting thousands of non-vegans every single second to keep up with the world population growth. So the only way we would probably one day reach like a vegan-friendly world, like a world where we have animal rights, is probably going to be through voting or politics. I would much rather make sure that the person I talk to, like, I wouldn't take it a loss if the person stays a hypocrite but believes in animal rights, because when the time comes for him to vote, he's gonna vote yes. He's already convinced.
Yeah,
right?
that's a good
People
point.
just don't want to do the effort. People don't want to. I have friends that are not vegan, that if right now the government said, we're going to vote on banning slaughterhouses and animal exploitation, grant more right.
Sorry, man. Just pause there. Pause there. Your voice is cutting out. Okay, just test your audio.
Okay, cool. So yeah, a lot of my friends who are not vegan, when the time comes for a vote, they would vote for animal rights, even though they're not vegan. And that's what we need. Like when the day comes, that's what we're gonna need. Numbers in voting, not numbers in vegans. You know, I mean, if someone's gonna go vegan after accepting animal rights, that's of course the ultimate goal. But it's not the end of the world, I would say. Like if someone says I'd rather be a hypocrite, it's like, okay, fine. As long as you know you're a hypocrite, I'll go to the next person.
That's actually really eye-opening for
Yeah.
me. So I've always held the position that you can't go into an outreach or a debate and expect that person to go vegan. Like that is a good goal, but it's not a realistic goal most of the time. Like it just isn't. Even if someone says they would go vegan, you still don't know. Like, um, so going into this
Yes.
conversation with the goal, which is very realistic, to expose that they have a contradicting worldview, ethical view, um, uh, and lifestyle with their values, and that fundamentally what they're doing every single day is very hypocritical. You know, paying for animal abuse and the violation of animal rights whilst being in favor of human rights is a very hypocritical thing to do. And I've, in personal experience, pretty much every single conversation I have, I can guarantee that I could get somebody to admit that they're a hypocrite. It can be actually very easy to do so because people aren't
Yes.
too afraid of admitting that, like once you spell it out to them.
Yeah.
Like it's something that they can admit knowing that they don't still have to change. But that is something, and I was just discussing this today with Vegan Gains, but that is something that they may have never thought of or even been aware of ever before in their life,
Yeah.
and they may not for the rest of their life had they not had that conversation. It's really important because, you know, they may not go vegan right there. That would be awesome, and if they became an activist, even better. However, like you said, if they go away now and if the opportunity arises where they would vote, you know, and they would vote in favor of animal rights, that's super powerful, as you said, because a vote is extremely powerful in creating societal change.
Yeah.
That is really nice to know. And not only that, like they may not go vegan straight away, but they will vote every time with their dollar. And look, they may now vote more often towards the vegan option. They might not be fully vegan, which I still think is not right at all. Like ethically, not good on a personal level. But if you influence someone to do that, that is far better than nothing. Far better than nothing. And we're going to see
Yeah.
vegan industries grow and grow, even though the people paying for it aren't vegan. But we need these industries to grow. Like we absolutely do. We need to see societal
Yeah.
change. So I completely agree with that. And it's I don't know what the word is. It's very convenient to know that when we are going into these discussions with people that you don't have to get frustrated because they didn't agree to go vegan. It's just unrealistic.
Yeah.
Don't waste your energy. You will burn out. If you do that every time, you will likely burn out.
Exactly. I remember I had a interesting experience. It was a few years ago, actually. I was with extended family, hanging out, and I had talked about animal rights. And one of the people there, he always teases me about animal rights, and sometimes even becomes like an argument, like a discussion.
Yeah.
And another person who is known in the family to be very smart, who's definitely not vegan, like furthest from vegan as you can imagine, loves eating steak, loves eating like the highest quality cheese from Italy and stuff like that. Um, he came into the conversation and he told the other guy, he said, I don't get it. Why do you even believe that you can make an argument against him? He said, I'm not vegan. I'm just like you. I love eating meat, but like at least just admit he's right. And this coming from a non-vegan, like this guy is really like not close to being vegan, you know? It's very powerful when other people hear that someone who's being a hypocritical non-vegan is stepping into a conversation to tell an anti-vegan, hey, like we both know you're wrong.
Yeah.
You know, it comes stronger than when I say you're wrong, because this is coming from someone who's admitting to being wrong and committing the wrong as well. And something similar happened with a friend of mine. childhood friend. He calls himself a non-practicing vegan. So he was I think it was a work dinner or something, and no one's vegan there. And someone made fun of veganism on the table, and he sent me a message like a day later. He said, "You won't believe it, but yesterday I was at a work dinner, and I actually had this moment, and I stepped in and I actually defended animal rights and veganism, and a lot of it because of what I've learned from you." And people don't realize what it means when meat eaters argue against each other about animal rights. Like, it's much more powerful than if I was there and I argued for animal rights, because they're like, oh, of course the vegan's gonna be pro animal rights, but here we have a big meat eater who's telling like, hey, we have to admit that we're wrong, you know?
Yes.
And this is the result of like getting people to agree, but not necessarily pushing yourself and pushing all the limits to make sure they also go vegan. I mean, again, if you can make them go vegan, that's amazing, but definitely don't like think it's the ultimate goal every single time.
Sure.
Sometimes you
Yes.
just gotta.
And look, that actually does remind me of my own experience being, a teenager, but knowing what I was doing was wrong. If someone brought up the idea of eating animals, I actually remember having conversations in some of my high school classes where the idea of eating animals would, like, the topic of eating animals would come up, and I would say, no, I don't think it's right. Even though I was eating animals, I just still think it's not right. I don't think it's right what we're doing. It's not ethical in really any way. Because of that, because I acknowledged it, maybe my transition into veganism was more likely to happen. Like, that seed was so strong. It was so strong in me that because I was already convinced that what I was doing was ethically not right, I was just doing it for pleasure and just living a life as a hypocrite. Not that it was truly spelt out to me that I was a hypocrite. If I had a conversation, say with myself now or any other activist, potentially I could have gone vegan after that, very, very soon. So that still shows the power of one-on-one conversations. But on the topic of what you said, just knowing what you're doing is wrong is very powerful in still influencing change within society, even if that person isn't a vegan. So I think that's really powerful. But what I can then go, now you've got this person that they've admitted that they're a hypocrite after the conversation, and that you hold the more ethically preferable position. But I'm not going vegan, but you're right, I'm wrong on this topic. I think it doesn't truly end there, and I still think that in that conversation, the level of impact you have on that person in really feeling how wrong they are and actually knowing the impact they're having on animals at every single meal can still be increased, like that impact that has on them. So, like, for example, if you're just having like this really peaceful conversation, you're wrong, I'm right, it's awesome. Like, if you can get them to admit that they're still wrong. But if it gets to the point where I just don't care, and I had a debate with somebody yesterday where they were just taking the I don't care position, and I kind of wish now that I shamed him a little bit more, politely shamed, not get like ad hominem, but like, do you really know what you're paying for? Have you seen it? And ideally show him the footage of this is actually what you're paying for every single time. Like, this level of suffering, because cognitive dissonance is a really powerful thing. Disconnect from your actions and actually seeing the victim goes a long way in how long you may take to go vegan in the future. Like, if you have the vision in your mind, this is where I think imagery and photojournalism, which I want to ask you about, comes into it, is so powerful, because every time you sit down to eat the body of a murder victim, essentially, and you know what it looked like for them to go into that slaughterhouse to be enslaved in a farm, I think that has a big impact on somebody and how strong that seed is. So what are your thoughts on that, like imagery and the power of imagery?
Yeah, I think definitely we should be using imagery, and this reminds me of the question you asked earlier about one of the most what are the most effective ways. I think what we struggle with is sometimes we don't know what is effective, and one way to know what is effective is to see what the industry is fighting against, because they fight against things that are effective. One of the things that they fight against, well, there's two main things they fight against. One is naming plant-based products after the animal-based version. They fight very hard against that, which means that it's effective. So people who are into business and they're entrepreneurs and they're making these products, you're doing a great job if you're naming them after the animal-based products, because the
Yes.
industry spends millions on lobbying against it. That's one effective thing. The other thing we know the industry fights against a lot is punishing those who document what's happening inside these places. They wouldn't do that if it wasn't effective. It's because they know that consumers change when they're exposed to the imagery. So yeah, photojournalism, documenting what happens inside and then showing what happens inside to people is very important. And it's not something that is exclusive to our movement. I was reading, and I wish I remember the specific name of the individual. The anti-slave trade movement really kicked off when photos came out of an individual who was enslaved, and they had their back whipped so many times that it was full of scars. It's a very famous photo.
Sure.
And that photo really stirred a lot of people into getting active. Graphic imagery is not
Yes.
like exclusively used in the animal rights movement. Think about like the helping refugee movement. When the war was happening in Syria, I was actually working in the UNHCR, the United Nations Committee for refugees. And one of the periods that they got the most support from both people and governments is when a photo surfaced of, I believe, was a 3-year-old Syrian refugee kid, 3-year-old,
Yes.
on the shore of a beach because he had fallen out of one of those boats that they use to run away.
Yeah.
Obviously, it was his body. It was such a powerful photo, right?
Yes.
It was like fully clothed. It wasn't graphic, but it's a 3-year-old dead
Yeah.
on the beach. And this shows that graphic imagery is not like exclusively effective in our movement. It has been effective in other movements as well, and it has been used in other movements as well. So I'm all for it. I think it's important. I also think the animals deserve to have their story told. You know, like you I mean we don't even have to go like to past movements. You know, look at what's happening now in Palestine. One of the most important things is documenting what's immediately happening on the
Yes.
spot. And it's sad because it's sad that you have to do that because you can't let people mourn like in peace, you know, and you gotta be there. But like it's the same when I've entered slaughterhouses and like these animals are getting slaughtered and all I can do is just film, you know. And it
Yes.
sucks because like you feel so powerless, but then you put that online and then you never know what can happen and the amount of people that you can impact with that image or video. So yeah, I think documenting and using graphic footage is very important, and those who oppose that, I would like to hear a good argument against it.
Oh, absolutely. I don't think there is a good argument against it for those very reasons, because if someone says if they have an argument against, you know, the expose footage and photos of animals in slaughterhouses and farms, because don't show my kids, that's what you typically hear, my kids don't need to see that. Would they also be in favor of not showing any human rights violations photography, you know, like where humans are being murdered, abused, and exploited? Would they equally be against that? I highly doubt it. I highly doubt that, and you're a massive hypocrite if that's the case. So yes. I can fully agree, and it makes me think of everything we've just discussed. It's like, whilst there may not be we have kind of briefly touched on what might be the most effective form of activism, but really it's like all these different factors that we can incorporate into whatever we do, whether it's street outreach, whether it's politics, photojournalism, whatever it is. There's all these little things that we can do that when we are interacting with other people or, you know, with the law and other politicians, whatever it may be, what can we do to influence these people what are like the strongest seeds that we can plant in these people? I mean, we can plant many small seeds or we can plant many big seeds, and it really depends on the impact you're having and the tools that you're using to plant those things. Ideally, yes, you get them to go vegan straight away, but as we said, that might not be the end goal of that conversation. But how powerful of an imprint did you leave on that person? I think that is very important to consider every time we do any form of activism. It's like, what are all the tools you can use in this one scenario? And it's going to differ from situation to situation depending on the form of activism you're doing. but there are definitely ways that we can try to strive to be the most effective in that moment. I think that's really awesome, man. And that does make me think about, like, again, with imagery, and this kind of comes now to disruptive activism in my mind, and I think, like, I think of obviously Tasha's work and everything I've been doing with her, and over the years we've kind of strived to, like, what is the image we leave in somebody's mind after every time we do a disruptive activism? Because essentially what we're trying to do is we're trying to symbolize in a way and try to express the suffering of these animals through Tasha's voice, the clothing that she's wearing, the props that she might be using, and the level of disruption that she actually creates in people. Like, whilst people might get pissed off, and I'd like to get your opinion on this, but this is my opinion anyway, people will get pissed off, right? They're not going to be happy. You've disturbed their dinner, you've disturbed their shopping experience, whatever they're doing that day. But fundamentally, you have left an image in that person's mind that is factually true, whether they believe it or not. You know, that we might have the footage playing, we might have the fake head of an animal, or more recently at Christmas time, the blood on the butcher's window. Like, man, if that was me as a non-vegan, potentially I could have been, oh, that's a little bit too far, but Jesus, that would not leave my mind. And then the moment that person now has a conversation, either with Tasha herself after that, like a more civil conversation, or with another activist, it can all click into place. And you get, holy shit, it can just hit so much harder once that next seed is planted, I believe. That's my position. And we've had many anecdotes of people that have literally gone vegan just from seeing her do that alone, and probably with other prior seeds planted from other activists and other things that they've seen. So what's your thoughts on disruptive activism and how that can play into all of this?
Yeah, again, we can think about disruptive methods being used in the past. If we think about the women's suffragettes movement, which was basically the movement that got women the right to vote in the UK, they were very disruptive.
Yes.
Like, I would say they make Tash Peterson look like the most peaceful activist on earth.
Yes.
And so they did a lot of things. They used to take rocks and then little papers and then attach messages, write messages about women's rights, and then attach these papers, like roll them up, attach them to the rock, and then go into shopping street and break all the glasses of the shops.
Wow.
And that's how they would disrupt people's shopping, right? Yes. That's one example. Another example is when they did a disruptive method of activism during a horse racing event, where one of the activists, I forgot her name now, she stood in front of the horse of the king, if I'm not mistaken, in the middle of the race, and she got hit. And if I'm not mistaken, again, she actually passed away from as a result of getting kicked.
She did.
These are just like a few examples of disruptive methods being used in other social justice movements. And people can say, yeah, well, you're turning people away, or you're pissing people off. Well, the point is that you are disrupting. Of course, that's going to piss people off. Why would they be pissed off if you're not disrupting them? Like, that's the whole point. You're trying to make someone realize that what they think is peaceful is actually not peaceful, and so you're disrupting that peaceful moment they're having. You can put it that way, and then someone can say, okay, but it's a fact that people get turned off by that. Yes, I agree. It's a fact. I agree that it's not everyone. Some people actually go vegan. Those who get turned off by that, the next time they see an animal rights activist raising awareness about animal rights in another way that is not disruptive, you know what's the first thing they say? Oh, like, I saw this other activist, she was so annoying, but you're so different.
The Overton window, isn't it? Is that what it's called? Is it called the Overton window? I forget the name. Have you heard of that?
Oh, I don't know.
No. I'll just make sure I'm saying that because, that's literally what you're... Yeah, so the Overton window is literally that. It's when someone is doing something on such an extreme that all the other activists in this case look normal now. They may not have been normal in the past. They might have thought, those silly activists. But now you're shifting it that these people are now... Overton. Yeah, like they are... Well, I haven't. I'm reading
Amazing.
the definition now, so it's kind of like
Yeah,
you're
I
you're shifting
also
that window
brought
of
it
what
up.
is
It's
considered normal and stuff like that and acceptable.
yeah,
So I think that in this case, if we really push it to the extreme, while still sticking to the core message and trying to not like dilute that, like I think there are wrong ways of doing activism, and that's what I said earlier on. Is like if you just don't even know what the message is that you're trying to present, well, it can just come across as very confusing, right? It might not have the same effect.
yeah.
But ensuring that, I think that generally we're going to create more acceptability among other activists, and then that person that might have been pissed off by, say, Tash, for example, is now going to talk to somebody else that they're like, oh, you're a breath of fresh air, I love you, now I'm more convinced to go vegan. So it's just like it can just
Well, I
work
mean,
like that.
look at the civil rights movement. A lot of people talk about that. People love quoting Martin Luther King and Malcolm X. You know how disruptive Malcolm X was? Like, white people hated him. And the thing is, even Malcolm X and Martin Luther King had like their differences in their approaches.
Yeah.
Even then, there's a story that at one point Martin Luther King was in the hospital, if I'm not mistaken, and Malcolm X goes there, and Martin Luther King is asleep, so he ends up talking to his wife, and he said, "Just to let you know, I obviously respect your husband's work, And he said this because they had publicly bashed each other. Malcolm X bashed more Martin Luther
Yeah.
King than the other way around. Sorry. But the idea is that Malcolm X was so disruptive and so scary to white people at the time. He was like so well spoken. People listened to him like his guidance was so scary for white people
Yeah.
that they had to turn to Martin Luther King as an alternative. But Martin Luther King had the same goal. So
Yeah.
Malcolm X didn't care if the goal is reached through his work or Martin Luther King's work. But as long as we reach the goal, that's all that matters. And this reminds me of the illusion of choice, which is like a marketing tactic that companies use. They've done this study where they've put a vending machine where they sell, let's say, only Pepsi Cola, right? And let's say every month they sell 1,000 cans, let's say, for the sake of the example. Then they put another vending machine next to it that sells Coca-Cola. And then the two machines together were like, let's say, instead of splitting it in two, each sold 750. Well, the question is, well, how come we were selling 1,000 before where there was only one, and now we're selling 1,500? It's because when you see only one, you ask yourself, do I want this or not? If you see two, you say, do I want this or that? That's the illusion of choice.
Yes.
You're making someone's question change in their head. You're taking the question from whether or not they want it to which one do they want.
Yeah.
So that's what Martin Luther King and Malcolm X use. Like, it's not a matter of whether you want black people to have rights. It's like, which one of us do you want to go through? You want Martin Luther King to be all peaceful and walk, or you want Malcolm X to show up with the Black Panthers and the guns and defend themselves if you lay their hands on you?
Yeah.
Like, I see disruptive activism the same way in all movements. Like, someone can be turned off by Tash's approach and then end up in a lecture in a university and go like, oh, actually, this is really chill. I won't listen to Tash, but Tash wouldn't care if the message is reached through her or the next person as long as the message is reached. So, yeah.
Spot on. I love that. I think that's a really great way to put it. And like, yeah, in that choice, it's like, do I want to drink Coca-Cola or not? Or is it, the question is often Coca-Cola or Pepsi? It's not a question of either. It's a question of either. And yeah, that's exactly right. Look, there's like fundamentally here, like what we're trying to get at is that there are so many ways that we can do activism. And like me working with Tash, like I can't do what she does. I've tried. It's just like, oh, it's so hard. Like I hear my voice. I'm so aware of what people think of me, and I have a more I just want to be socially acceptable. Not often, like I still like to push people's buttons, but in different ways, right? So like how I differ to her is like, and like I see this effect with us. Like now that I've become more activist, like, oh, I always hated Tash, but Jack seems more reasonable. But then someone might not like my activism, they like hers. Like it's just how it is. It's just people have preferences, and that's why activism diversity is so important. It's just so important that we have so many people doing so many things because there's no one approach. Like fundamentally, it just isn't the case. But
Yeah.
like, I think we've really covered activism there, effective activism, and what that actually means. And it's not black and white. There are just so many ways to do it, and I think we need to be doing it in every single way we can. But now I got some hot topics, I guess. I want to start with an easy question. If there was a red button and you could press it right now, and it would make it illegal everywhere in the world to violate the rights of animals in the same way that we wouldn't violate human rights, would you press that button and make it illegal worldwide?
Yeah, I would jump on it.
It's pretty simple. I think I've actually heard, I can't say it word for word. I'm not entirely sure on Earthling Ed's position on this, but I have heard him say that he probably wouldn't want to make it instantly illegal because he just thinks that potentially there'd be a lot of chaos and it wouldn't be effective and it could potentially detriment the movement. I don't want to say that actually is his position, but I do remember hearing it kind of like that. And I used to hold a similar position. I used to think, well, actually, I think it just wouldn't work. It would create chaos, and then we would create maybe there would be underground animal agricultural systems that could be far more unethical and really welfare standards. So I would be concerned of pressing it. My position has changed, but what do you think about that?
Well, even if it creates chaos, like how many people can you supply with underground animal products?
Yeah, that's exactly right.
Like it's that all you have to do is just compare it to legalized drugs, or like just like take the legalization of weed in some countries. The second it becomes legalized, production pops up everywhere left and right, and you can produce in an amount that is unimaginable because you can buy as much land as you want and produce
Yes.
it. But if it's not legal, you don't have access to that publicly producing area or land, and therefore you cannot produce as much. So I think it's much easier to make it illegal immediately and then work on shutting down and educate at the same time than keep it legal and try to still fight a multi-billion, if not trillion-dollar industry who has more money, power, and influence that you could ever imagine.
Yeah.
Plus, if it becomes illegal, the prices go up immediately as well. When the prices go up, most of the population can't afford it. Those who can afford it will not afford it every single day. So I think for me, it's much easier to imagine that we would get faster change and bigger impact by making it illegal first and then fixing the leftover, than continue the way we are. Because let's face it, world population is growing. Some countries are consuming much less meat than before, but the overall number of animals getting bred and killed is still on the rise every single year, regardless of how much activism we're all doing.
Yeah.
So you keep it legal, that's all just going to continue growing.
100%. It's, well, really fundamentally what we're saying is that the biggest roadblock here is not people, it's actually the legal system itself. Like we've said throughout this discussion, it's like, yes, convince as many people to go vegan as possible, but fundamentally, as long as it stays legal, I mean, that's just what's going to be responsible. Because as we said, if it was legal to violate human rights, well, you could try to convince everybody to not violate human rights, but fundamentally, if they're allowed to do it, personal pleasure often comes first. Convenience. Oh, it's convenient to have a human slave, even though I think it's wrong. It's just so convenient. It's just so nice. Like, that's what often will come first. Humans are irrational beings fundamentally, in the way we act. I mean,
I feel like someone can crop that part out.
Go for it. Go for it.
I also do want to say that when you talk about making it illegal and then hypothetically there's an underground system, you also have to ask yourself how many people are willing to do something that is illegal that has consequences.
Yes.
So that's another thing as well.
That is very true. Yeah, it would be so inconvenient at that point. People would just have to get over it, essentially. And yes, there would be lots of pissed off people at the start, but like, as you said, alongside education, alongside that, like, you could cover a lot of ground very quickly that way. And Look, this is a massive hypothetical because it's just not going to happen like that. But it is something that happens
Yeah.
slowly, and it's incremental when it comes to politics. You know, we might ban live export and then murder all the animals in your own country, which isn't ethically good, but it's still creating this effect in people's mind that we're recognizing that these animals have the capacity to suffer and we want to reduce that just from a welfarist perspective. But that still has an impact on recognizing the rights of these animals, and that's something that we can lead towards into the future, whether or not somebody is willing to see that right now. And that's something that has been brought up in Australia just recently. So the current Prime Minister Albanese, I think before he came into power, he said he had some type of policy he wanted to bring in to end live export. Didn't happen, but now it's kind of been put in place for 2028. There's a lot of outrage around that, but I think that people seeing that would be enough to be like, the majority of people would be like, yeah, well, I think it's not right. It's obvious that they're suffering in these boats, and that's not right. And they recognize that these animals deserve better. It's a good first step.
Yeah.
But it's just it's the first step. That's what we're saying, and ideally we can build upon that time and time again. That's super powerful in terms of politics.
Yeah.
Okay, a few other topics. How long do you have, man? What's your cutoff time?
I'm good. Don't worry. We can continue.
All right. Well, okay, a few things. We've kind of covered Islam and veganism. I wanted to talk about that, but I mean, you've kind of, when you were talking about, the initiative that you've been setting up, that, I mean, maybe you could just give a brief overview, because people have this idea of
Yeah,
Islam
sure.
that it's like it's a violent religion. Fundamentalists are very violent, and the same could be said for Christianity. But what do you think about the core messages of Islam and how it can actually coincide with veganism quite comfortably?
Yeah. Well, to begin with, yeah, I do agree that like any religion, if you're a good person, you're going to use it to do good. If you're a bad person, you're going to use it to do bad. That's it. That applies to all religions, in my opinion. So when it comes to Islam, and eating other animals and animal rights in general, we have to go back to the context of 1,400 years ago in the Middle East. 1,400 years ago in the Middle East, there were no animal rights. Animals did not have any rights. And it is said that people would even chop off, let's say, the leg of an animal to eat, but then they wouldn't kill the animal. So obviously, like, exaggerated amounts of suffering were caused onto other animals. And similar to other areas of the world, horrible things were being done to other animals. Now, within Islam, there's something called halal. Halal in Arabic comes from the word halala, which means, which is the verb to give permission to. So when something is halal, it means it's permitted, right? Now, there's a big difference between permitted and obliged. Okay, that's already to start with. One thing you have to keep in mind within Islam is that the religion itself, the Quran says that you are given permission to kill certain animals and to kill them in a certain way. When someone talks about halal with you, you have to make sure that when you talk back to them about this issue, that you don't talk about it as this is wrong. Because when you say this is wrong, you are basically saying that you know better than the God that they believe in, right? You cannot win a conversation with anyone in that way, whether that's a Muslim or a Christian or a Jew or Hindu or whatever. So what you do have to make, and this is what I've learned from reading the guides that these Muslim activists prepared on the team, is that you have to use what the religion actually talks about when it comes to other animals. Yes, you are given permission to do that. Permission, again, not an obligation. And you do not, like, there's nowhere in the religion that says in order to be a Muslim, you have to consume animal products, okay? Yeah. Now, when it comes to halal slaughter is not only the moment of killing the animal, it's actually a whole process. The animal should not have suffered, should not go through suffering. The animal should not be caged. This already immediately removes all factory farms, by the way. So factory farms and halal don't even go together.
Yeah.
Which is why there's actually a big controversy around this issue. A lot of Muslims say, like, how can we certify a factory farm product as halal when we know how much suffering these animals go through? Okay, that's one thing. The other thing is the animals should not see or smell the blood or other animals dying or getting killed, or the knife, for example. And that's already removing most of the slaughterhouses out there. I've been in slaughterhouses that have the halal certification, where chickens are hung upside down, all next to each other, getting killed next to each other, seeing everything, smelling everything, seeing the blood, watching each other get slaughtered. By definition, by the Quran, that does not pass the halal specifications, let's say. So immediately when you actually study the religion, you realize that halal is what we think about when we think about the most pain and suffering free example of killing an animal, which you cannot use to create and supply for the demand that exists in this day and age. Okay, this is one thing already. The other thing that we have to think about is when and why you are killing. When it talks about killing an animal, it says, I think, if I'm trying to remember the verse in Arabic, I think it says, وَإِن قَتَلْتُمْ فَأَحْسِنُوا الْقَتْلَ. It says, and if you kill well. If. Like, no one's saying, hey, go and kill, but do it this way. If you kill. The Prophet himself did not consume that much meat. In fact, the stories say that it was once every 4 to 5 months, and they would know that because there would be smoke coming out of the house that he was in. Another thing that we have to think about is one of the main principles within Islam is the principle of harm avoidance, which basically says that at any moment when you have more than one option, you are obliged as a Muslim to choose the option that causes the least amount of suffering, which is technically what vegans are trying to do every single day. Because we know that crops, so unfortunately, cause some amount of suffering, but we still know that a plant-based diet causes the least amount of suffering compared to other diets. So the principle of harm avoidance is one of the most important principles within Islam. So obviously, as a Muslim, if you know that you are not obliged to eat meat, and you know that there's a principle of harm avoidance, you would want to avoid causing harm onto others. So that's another point. Now, we can talk about specific industries. We can talk about specific codes given by people. For example, I believe, I think, what was it? Just give me a second. I don't want to misquote anyone. That's fine.
Yeah, that's fine.
So there's a very important individual within Islam, and for those who are listening and are not aware, within Islam there's different sects. The same way within Christianity there's Catholics and Protestants, etc., etc. So within the Shiite sect, there's the Imam Ali, who was a very, very important person. And there's a very famous quote by him that says, do not make your stomach a graveyard for other animals, or graveyard for animals. There was someone who was one of the most important, they call it the Sahaba, which comes from the Arabic word of friend. So one of the closest Sahaba of the Prophet, his nickname was Abi Laham. Laham means meat. Abi means the one who denies, the one who rejects. So if one of the closest people of the Prophet had a nickname called Abi Laham, which means the person who rejects meat, you're gonna tell me that you think that as a Muslim you can't be vegan, or reject meat? That's another thing. Another point that we can talk about is that within Islam you are given the important, it's very important to take care of your body and your health. That's a very important part of Islam. So if you know that this product, the products that you're consuming, the diet that you're eating, is the leading cause of death around the world, heart disease, cancer, diabetes, etc., how can you call it like a healthy thing to do when you know that it's causing all this trouble to you? That's another thing. Within Islam, you are given the responsibility of being a good steward of planet Earth. Okay, there's a part, if I'm not sure if it was a quote from the Prophet or if it was a verse from the Quran, but it says, do not overuse water even if you live next to a big river with a strong current. And we are using how much water exactly for dairy or meat, these products, like, so you know how we talk about like, oh, veganism is good for the animals, good for your health, good for your environment. In Islam, the messages about being good to animals, about being good to your health, about being good to environment, all lead you to veganism as well.
Yeah.
When it comes to specific things, specific industries, for example, take the dairy industry, take the egg industry. Basically, they're both based on separating mothers and fathers from their children, right? There's a story where the Prophet and some of his Sahaba were walking, and then the Prophet goes somewhere, and some of the Sahaba take the chicks of a bird, a mother, obviously. And when the Prophet comes back, he sees the mother bird crying, and he says, who has taken away the chicks of this mother? Return them right now, because the mother is suffering. So it's like, you're going to tell me the same person who said that wouldn't say, hey, don't separate the calf from the mother because the mother is suffering, and that's not right. Like, I could go on and on, really.
Yeah.
It's mind. I
It
actually
is
even
mind
bought
blowing,
books.
man. It's literally like you're describing a vegan religion to me.
Yeah, I actually, this is one book that I read that's really good, Animals and Islam.
Yep.
I ended up, like, again, I'm not religious. I'm not like, I've never like been religious. Like, I even bought the Quran because I couldn't believe. Like, I was like,
Yes.
I got to look more into this. There's also like another book I have somewhere about animals in Islam, because the amount of messages, the amount of stories, the amount of, when I say stories, basically there's this thing, because things can be from the Quran or it can be from a hadith. A hadith is a story, and then each type of story has this specific way of checking how true they are.
Yeah.
And some stories cannot be accepted because it can be like misinterpretations over time. And so you look into it and you're like, the amount of things that the Prophet, after coming, made illegal, for actually the amount of rights that were given to animals because of Islam is mind-blowing. You are not allowed to harm an animal. Like, if you're going to eat an animal, you have to kill, and then it says like all the ways that you have to kill, right? Otherwise, you're not allowed to do what they used to do, for example, chopping the leg off and then eat the leg and then let the animal suffer. You're not allowed to what's the word, when you take an iron, heat it up, and then like put the number in the face of the animal.
Oh man, the words left my head. I
Yeah,
know it. Yeah. Yeah.
well, that's not allowed to do that in
Sure.
Islam as well. You're not allowed to hunt for fun in Islam. That's illegal. That's against the rules of Islam to hunt animals for fun. You're not allowed to use and like be all arrogant with the fur of wild animals. That's not allowed in Islam.
Yeah.
Like, all the specific rules were created thanks to Islam at the time when animals had literally zero rights. The only thing that nowadays we would have an issue with is still the part that it is permitted to kill. But again, keep in mind that we're talking about a time of 1400 years ago in the middle of the Middle East. They were given permission to kill, and even then they were told, oh, there's a part that says, be careful of meat as it has the same addictive, it creates the same addictive part of you as alcohol does. It literally says that. It literally says, like, be aware, because you're going to end up eating too much. Like, that's not good. You shouldn't do that. Again, I could go for hours. I would suggest, if people who are interested, and again, I'm saying things that I read from the guides that we prepared, so I might be misquoting, misusing specific words, or messing up here and there. I do recommend everyone go to MiddleEastVeganSociety.org and check out the section called Vegan Islam. Once you're on that section, there's a part for eggs, dairy, fur, honey. All of it is prepared there. And on the main page as well, you can download the flyer for free, of course, in English and Arabic as well, if anyone's interested. And if you're doing any outreach and you come across a Muslim person, you can simply say, I don't know about this. there's an organization that has prepared this resource. Feel
Yes.
free to check it out. They can read the flyer. There's a QR code that can land them on the page as well, and they can see it there.
Essentially, every single Muslim needs to know this information. That is just, it's powerful. It's like the Quran just spells it out to you completely. Whilst
Oh,
it, yeah, go on.
I'm gonna interrupt you. One of the most important things, I'm gonna read this word by word
Sure.
because I could not believe it. What is one of the most important things about veganism that we think about when it comes to animal rights? It's the fact that other animals are not seen as individuals, right?
Sure,
That they are
sure.
not seen as commodities. In the Quran, there's a verse that says, there's not an animal on earth or a two-winged flying creature, but they are communities like you. Basically, the Quran is saying, like, these animals, they are communities just like you. They're not that different. And one extra thing, a lot of people say, like, oh, animals don't have souls when they're talking about like being religious or spiritual. Within Islam, they believe that every single animal is also a Muslim who is devoted to God. Okay, in order to do that, you have to have a soul. So
Right.
Islam actually grants animals the community and the soul, and within the community obviously comes individual and personhood. So it's mind-blowing. It's really mind-blowing.
Wow. Too much to even say. And like I guess if you're in a conversation with a Muslim in an outreach or a debate, well, particularly an outreach where you're rushed on time. Something that I've done since learning just the basics. Like I didn't know all of that, but I think basically when it comes to halal, the idea is of trying to minimize suffering as much as possible. And you described it as just choosing the non-violent option, if that's an option completely. But most Muslims that I've spoken to do agree it is about minimizing suffering because they describe what halal is and they list out the practices, and it's like, well, it sounds to me like you're trying to minimize suffering as much as possible, and you get them to agree, yeah, that's right. Do you not think minimizing suffering to the greatest degree would just be going vegan and granting them the right just to live their life freely? If they say no to that, it's like, well, you spelled it out to me. I'm asking you just the logical extension of that question, and often they will agree. And that's why I've had such good conversations with Muslim people. I've had great conversations because they actually already hold the belief of suffering reduction, which is a welfarist perspective, but then you're just trying to logically extend that to animal rights, which I think is it's actually it's great. That's why we should be having more conversations with Muslims and taking that line of reasoning, I think.
Yeah. In fact, I would even go as far as saying that the religion and the scripture encourages you to be an animal rights activist, because it talks about the amount of, again, the stories and hadiths and places where it talks about the importance of protecting other animals. That's very interesting. For example, a lot of people talk about the Muslim holiday called Eid al-Adha, which basically means the holiday of sacrifice, right? The whole idea is that you sacrifice what is valuable to you in order to help others, right? Beautiful thing. At the time, 1400 years ago, and again, hundreds of years ago, what was seen as valuable was what they call livestock, right? Because that's, I mean, people used to marry their daughters all around the world by taking livestock from the husband, right? That's how people work. Again, not like specific and exclusive to Islam. This happened all around the world. There's a story where someone comes to the Prophet and says, I was going to slaughter a lamb, but because I felt mercy, I let the lamb go. Will I get punished for this because I didn't sacrifice on this day? And he is told, for every single animal you show mercy to, God will double that mercy back to you. So if anything, the religion is saying, hey, you can kill, but if you show mercy, God will double that mercy back to you.
Wow.
Like,
God, couldn't be more obvious. It could not be more obvious. Wow, it is very Oh, by the way, man, actually, it does look better if you sit back. You're more in focus. I just noticed in that case, if you are comfortable, because it does. Yeah, cool. Yeah, that is super eye opening, and I can't stress enough that every Muslim needs to know that, because if you were to follow your religion accurately, and I'm not religious either, and you don't have to be
Yeah.
religious, but the thing I think what is powerful about this is that um, Muslims in particular, I think most that I've come across really hold strong to their religious beliefs. And if they were to know this truth and they were raised in this truth, well, maybe every Muslim raised with that truth would be a very, very strong vegan, an animal rights activist, you would hope. Um, so I think
Yeah.
it's, yeah, awesome, awesome. Okay, so, all right, I think that does cover it all. I appreciate that. And I guess I got a few other questions here. I don't want to get through all of them. We can probably finish around 10 o'clock, plus minus, or whatever. But,
Yeah.
hmm. Oh, I got a few good ones. Um, all right, so we've got, maybe I could say a few of them out loud. I've got vegan bodybuilders in relation to what Alex O'Connor has said recently. Maybe you have heard about that, yeah. Um, maybe we can, but I got vegan perfectionism, the whole carnivorous animal debate, but that's a big topic to open up. I think this late into the conversation. Maybe we could save it for next time. Um, vegan pets, the influence of industries, which I think we've talked about a little bit so far, and ex-vegans, which that's pretty boring, but that's still something we can talk about. But no, I want to get into that whole argument that like, if you're eating more than you need, you're doing these extra unnecessary acts, like, say, for example, being a bodybuilder. Alex O'Connor has made the argument that you aren't being vegan by doing so because you're causing more unnecessary harm. What's your argument against that, if you have
I,
one?
I think, yeah, I think I would say that in order to make that argument, well, he would first have to provide evidence that there is more harm being caused. But let's say, for the sake of the hypothetical, that he did provide some kind of evidence. I think it falls under the nirvana fallacy, basically, which is a logical fallacy where you're rejecting a specific argument because it cannot be done in a perfect way, right? Because the thing is, like, if you go that way, you can also say, oh, well, why do I have two lights on right now? I'm creating unnecessary harm. And it's like, where do you draw the line? Like, do I like count every single calorie? What do I count it with? Do I buy a machine? What amount
Yeah,
of
how
suffering is a
accurate.
machine
Yep.
creating?
Yep.
It's a slippery slope. It's a logical fallacy, like based on nirvana fallacy. But I also think that he's saying that because a lot of vegans, including myself, I've done this in the past, we talk about this as specifically, we use the sentence causing unnecessary suffering, right? We're talking about this unnecessary thing. And so he's taking that and creating this question, which, to be honest, it is a good question. I do think it has like its weak part, but I think it's because he's using a weak argument for veganism, which is the unnecessary
Yes.
suffering part.
Which
So
I would, just to add on that, I would argue is actually the reason he might not even be vegan right now, because he was really associating the whole definition and idea of veganism as around suffering in particular, and he would rarely talk
yeah,
about exploitation and the violation of rights. Had he had been talking
yeah,
about that, and he had been really strong on that position, maybe he would still be vegan. But he kind of got into it with this perspective of reducing suffering.
yeah,
And
because
yeah, go on.
he got a lot of his he's very much influenced by Peter Singer's approach,
Yes.
utilitarian approach to animal rights. I wasn't surprised at all when he said he's not vegan. He never believed in rights. I've talked to him about this subject. I had him on my podcast. We talked about this specific issue of rights. And so after that conversation, I remember thinking, I wouldn't be surprised if he becomes the next vegan one day. His stance was very clear. It was very much like a utilitarian stance.
Yeah.
And Peter Singer himself is not vegan, so I'm not surprised.
Yeah, I know. And people, I laugh at this every time. People call Peter Singer the father of animal rights, and it's like, it makes me cringe. He's literally bit the bullet in a conversation with Alex, saying that he would kill humans if it didn't result in like overall suffering or negative suffering, like
that was
widespread.
a really good one by Alex.
Yeah, I know, and he wasn't even vegan when he asked that question.
Yes.
I know
Yeah,
it's
that's true.
crazy. But yeah, that's essentially where utilitarianism and I guess you could say welfarism, if you're just strictly a welfarist, can take you because
Yeah,
you can create a situation which could very truly happen where you take the lives of individuals that without inflicting any suffering on that individual. You just completely were unaware that you killed them. They were completely unaware that you were going to kill them. They were living a free life. Like I could have been raised by my
yeah,
parents the exact same way I did, but they had this goal in mind that they were going to raise me and kill me at the age of 18, and they could have done it when I was sleeping. I didn't suffer.
yeah,
I didn't suffer at all. It's a rights violation. You literally stole the life from somebody. You violated their right to
yeah,
freedom, a free life, and that's fundamentally what animal rights is, and that's what we're saying veganism really is. It's just the logical extension of human rights, and I imagine Alex is in favor of human rights, and I think if we applied it
yeah.
truly to him in that way, well, I don't know.
Um,
Maybe you could
I
tell me
don't
what you.
think I don't from what I know from our conversation, he's not in favor of rights
Oh, he's just in rights in
as
general. Okay.
yeah, and that goes hand in hand with utilitarianism. You can't really have rights and strict utilitarianism because in utilitarianism, the most ethical thing to do is the action that creates the most amount of good possible and least amount of
Right.
suffering possible, even if that includes
Uh,
violating someone's right? So Peter Singer has a famous quote that says something along the lines of I'm not against animal rights because it's animals, but because it's rights. Because as a utilitarian, they don't accept rights. So yeah,
that's interesting. Pause the conversation, man. I'm just going to close the door because I can hear some music.
no worries.
Yeah. That is definitely. And look, when these things happen with ex-vegans, and that kind of comes onto the topic of ex-vegans, we learn every time when this happens. Like some people just didn't see Alex that coming. They just didn't see him becoming ex-vegan because he was so outspoken. And this comes back to the
Yeah,
idea that we need to be very strong on what that core message is. What is it that we're trying to advocate for? Because it slipped past me because I didn't truly understand the core message when he was active at that point. Like I thought I did, but I actually don't think I
yeah,
did. Had I had the same knowledge I did now, I would have seen that red flag very early on, and I could have predicted it as other people did, and you saw it. You weren't surprised either, because if you're coming at this from the perspective of suffering and utilitarianism, you technically can live that way. You don't have to be a strict vegan in that way. You don't have to be a perfect vegan
yeah,
because your goal is maximizing well-being and well, I don't know if you could say that, I guess so, but just living in a way that just doesn't involve as much suffering, but that we don't. And even in this case with Alex, when they say they don't truly understand, they're not in favor of rights, or they don't believe in rights, I don't know. I think if you really put it to the test on him, like, and actually got to the bottom of like why, like, do you actually think that? Like, I think if we dug a little bit deeper, I'd be interested to see how his logic would start to fall apart if we really pushed him enough. Somebody like that, anyway. But yeah, I think that's
yeah,
really just is what is so important about understanding the core message of animal rights. Again, it's so important. But I guess then this comes on to vegan perfectionism, like there are people that there are quote unquote vegans, I'd say, that don't think that we need to be perfect vegans. We don't like if we are classing ourselves as vegans, an occasional slip up is okay. An occasional bit of animal abuse is okay every now and then. What do you have to say to that?
yeah. I happen to be occasionally quite racist as well. Every now and then, just
Me too. I guess so. Yeah.
discriminate people based on their skin color, where they come from. It
Yes.
makes absolutely no sense. I think, unfortunately, people who do that, I believe, don't want to be disliked by non-vegan friends and loved ones and maybe family members, so they have that occasional thing. But they don't realize the amount of harm they're causing to their own message if they have a good one in the first place, because you're basically showing that this is not something as serious. You can just have a slip up. Um, it's not like, you've been eating quite healthy for 2 months and you're like, you know what, I'm gonna have a beer tonight. I'm gonna have a burger, No,
Yes.
it's not like, I mean, when I say, but I'm talking about vegan burger, but it's really like, no, I've been a good person. Maybe I should kill someone tonight. Like,
Doesn't make
what?
sense.
You know, you
Yeah.
can't like make any consistent um extensions from that and try to compare it to something else and still make sense.
Yeah, I mean, like you just put it in a human context, and it's just like we would see that as crazy. Well, firstly, there would be legal consequences if that happened today.
Yeah.
Like you would find the legal consequences because there's a legal system against it. But in the case where there isn't one, people can slip up if they're not strong enough on their ethics and their morals and actually understanding of why they wouldn't do that.
Yeah.
And I just think that's where it's super important to always compare it in the human case, because we wouldn't stand for that. And like, you don't even have to compare to humans. I mean, you could, in our society, well, here in Australia and most Western countries, when it comes to dogs, pets, cats, like, we hold quite a strong rights view with them in this case, in terms of abusing them and murdering them. Like a slip up, if someone kicks their cat, it becomes mass media attention, because we realize
National
that
news.
yeah, that's right, international news, because that little slip up is not good enough. That is horrible. Like, we recognize that as being, that's a slip up that we should never allow. But when it comes to just general veganism, it's just acknowledging that, but for all animals, and that in the same case, there are no slip ups that should be had. Like, it's just completely unethical. It should be very simple, and vegan perfectionism isn't just I think the word perfectionism is a dirty word, because in a general sense, yes, we shouldn't be a perfectionist. Like, it can be negative on your mental health. It's not realistic. But this isn't an unrealistic goal to just not discriminate another species and abuse them, exploit them, and murder them. It's quite simple not to do that. It's literally a non-action, right? It's just a non-action.
And there's another thing that's important to note here when we talk about the legal consequences of hurting a cat or a dog. We have to keep in mind that most of the time these laws are basically indirect rights indirect duties that we hold towards other animals. So there's direct duties and indirect duties. For example, I have a direct duty towards you not to harm you. But if I were to harm your dog, I'm not breaking any direct duty towards your dog. I hold an indirect duty towards you through your dog, because by harming your dog, I'm causing suffering onto you, the human. So even these dog and cats rights, they're very much human-based rights, because if I kill technically a dog or a cat who doesn't belong to anyone, it's much more complicated to get me in trouble, because I never had any legal direct duties towards these animals. Right? Yes. It's very interesting. Yes. Even when we do give these animals rights, it's about, because you upset the owner, right? Because we're seen as
the moment you take the human owner out of the moment you take the human owner out of the equation, it doesn't become a legal issue, is what you're saying. Yeah. Wow. See, again, that's a very human-centric legal system, and that's not the type of legal system that we need. Whilst it's good that we have that there, it is good that we are still recognizing that the indirect rights of these animals, but fundamentally the next step would just be to logically extend that to direct rights, which is that makes a lot of sense. Pets. We're on the topic of pets, and maybe this can be the last topic. What are your thoughts on vegan pets, non-vegan pets? Like, do you think when a vegan takes on an animal that we should extend veganism to them, because fundamentally we're the ones paying for the animal products? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I don't think we're extending veganism onto them, because we cannot make them understand what veganism is. They're not accepting or rejecting something. But as people who take care of like a companion animal, you have the responsibility to make sure that they are healthy and they are well fed. And it just happens to be that there's a way to do that without buying animal products. I believe it's a moral responsibility to go that way. If we know for a fact, and countless studies have been done, and we know that it's perfectly fine to do it, and these products are out there, I think of course you should do that. So easy decision for me.
Yeah, it is an easy decision, and the hard one for most people is when it comes to cats. But the science is definitely out there now, and I know many
Yeah.
vegan cats that are thriving. I mean, I've asked Richard Vegan Gains about this and about his cats, and he has some very healthy looking cats, and he's, and whilst it's not maybe as simple at the start as with dogs, like dogs, you don't have to monitor much at the beginning. With cats,
Yeah.
yes, you might want to monitor their urine pH and stuff like that. But again, the products are actually out there now. But in maybe in some circumstances, the products aren't available. And I mean, the case could be made that even if you couldn't feed them a healthy diet, I don't know if we can still say that it's vegan what we're doing. Yeah, I think that, like, whilst you might have to go against, this is my perspective, if you couldn't hypothetically feed your pet, your companion animal a plant-based diet and follow your ethical framework, I still think that is violating animal rights, because you literally have to go chop an animal's head off, multiple animals' heads off, to feed one animal. And I just think that whilst it would be a very difficult thing, and I'm not saying if this is hypothetical anyway, because it is the case that you can feed your companion animal vegan, but I just think that it would be just horribly and ethically wrong to say that one animal's life is worth way more than potentially tens to hundreds of animals' lives. I just think, even if it was hypothetically not possible, I don't think we can say that what we're doing is vegan, because we're prioritizing the welfare of one animal but literally murdering many others. I mean, what do you think about that?
Finally something where we can push each other a bit.
Okay, go ahead.
All right. So I think yes and no, and the reason I say that is because it depends what you're feeding them. Some people want to get like grade A local like grass-fed beef straight from the butcher and stuff for their animals. 100% agree there. I'm with you. However, a lot of the animal foods out there, the animal-based ones, they're actually the leftover from slaughterhouses, mixed together and then added some vitamins and minerals, etc., and some colorants and some smells as well, or whatever, to make it something that the animal could enjoy eating. So I don't necessarily think, I think of it as a lot of times it depends on the product you're purchasing, whether or not it's a direct product or a byproduct. Obviously, the byproduct still contributes to this horrible industry, but I'm much more worried about the main product that's creating the byproduct, right? I'm also much more hopeful in general because of lab grown meat actually just solving this problem altogether. I'm really looking forward to that.
Yeah.
Because then people have absolutely no argument against it. So I would say I agree with you if we're talking about those people who go get like straight from the butcher or the farm down the road, who sometimes people I know people who like because they look at their dog, for example, as their child, and they're like, I get the best and most expensive one, and there we are literally killing the animal for dog food, right?
Yeah.
However, as I said, some products, and actually I wouldn't say most, I haven't done the research, but a lot of the products out there is literally leftover. You still contribute to the horrible industry, but I wouldn't necessarily say you contribute to extra animal deaths because they were not killed for that in the first place.
Well, let's say that we had because ideally we're getting to the place where we would live in a vegan world when animals' rights are legally granted. In that case, could you still make that argument, or would that then differ? It's like it's no longer a byproduct, and if you are, say, you don't even trust the evidence that that your companion animal could be vegan and the products are available, but like, let's say it's no longer a byproduct, and I could try to push back a bit more on whether it is a byproduct or not, but I'm not entirely sure. But let's say we're living in a vegan world now, but the only non-vegans are companion animals. Would you still then say that?
Yeah, I agree there.
Yeah.
No, I would agree then. Of course, yeah. I mean that would just be logical. I would agree in that hypothetical, of course, that
So
it would
fundamentally, you're
the vegan
saying
thing.
that if it's a byproduct and you're not actually creating an economical demand, is that what you're kind of saying? Like if it's not actually a proper
Well,
supply demand
I
chain?
I think the downside is that it keeps the industry running, right? Because the industry makes a lot of money from byproducts as well.
Yeah, that would
Because
be the
this is not
position
the
I'm
only
taking.
byproduct.
But yeah,
Yeah, so like I wouldn't buy something just because it's a byproduct. I'm still against it, right?
yes, yeah.
But that's also because I don't need any of these byproducts. Where I struggle in a hypothetical like that is, what do you do with the animal? You kill them because then you're violating their right. You let them
But the
starve,
animal
you're
rights
violating their
perspective
right.
would be and I know, like I personally couldn't do it, and this is the whole carnivorous animal debate too, as well. It literally is that now. Like that's kind of what we are talking about. It's like, are you going to take the life of one animal if that was the only practical option? Like that's essentially what we're assuming here. It's like the only practical option right now is to take their life in this hypothetical, which could very much be the case in many circumstances. To save the lives of many animals over that lifetime.
Yeah,
Now,
yeah.
right, yes, you're violating one animal's right, but in the defense of many other animals. So essentially, and this is Richard's definition of veganism, which is, you know, uh, granting, like trying to prevent as many violations of rights as much as possible. And it's kind of now it sounds a little bit utilitarian, but essentially it's just if that was the case, so it's like you have this cat, this or whatever animal they are, and you're left with the option of taking that animal's life, violating their right to life, in order to prevent many violations. Like, what do you think that would align with animal rights still?
Um, I think it is purely utilitarian because that is technically what utilitarianism is. The most ethical action is the one that creates the most utility. Um, I wanted to say something, but then I
Yeah,
also wanted to listen, and I lost my thoughts. So if you could just give me a second.
that's all right.
Um, well, there were many things I want to say. One of the things was also like, well, as long as I have food, the animal can also eat that food. That was one thing I was thinking about anyway.
Sure.
But for the sake of the hypothetical, um,
But let's say you couldn't get the nutrients that your cat needs because maybe you do have to be a bit more
yeah.
specific in that.
Oh yeah, I remember. I remember. Okay, so the question you were asking is or you're probably hypothetically taking the life of one animal to save the life of hundreds, if not thousands, let's say hundreds of animals.
Sure,
Okay,
sure.
so if someone says yes to that, then I would ask them, would you now take the life of a human who's not going vegan in order to save the life of hundreds of animals? This person will very probably say, no, I wouldn't take the life of a human. I don't want to kill anyone. Then I just name the trait. Why would you take the life of the animal but not the life of the human to save hundreds of animals?
And I would say that's a logically inconsistent person if they wouldn't take the human life. And I know this sounds crazy, but if we
Yeah.
want to be logically consistent with animal rights, and this is literally Richard's position. He says so. I have a pretty good idea of him now, like because this is kind of where I've
Yeah.
learned this from. That's why I'm talking about him. Is um, if they're ignorant to it, you know, you want to give them the benefit of the doubt. You want to allow them to go vegan, try to convince them to go vegan. But if they know what they're doing is wrong and they're a hypocrite and they're going to live that life, he would say if there was no legal system, if you want to be logically consistent and prevent the rights violations of many animals, the logical thing to do would be to take that life. Do you not think that that is a logically consistent position to take if you're an animal rights
Oh, it's
activist?
it's of course it's consistent.
Yeah.
Like there's no doubt that this train of thought is consistent. Um, I'm more worried about like whether it's practical and doable, and if we want to create that kind of system. I'd much
In
rather
many,
force
yeah,
someone on.
yeah, go on.
Sorry, I was just saying I'd much rather force someone to not harm others than kill them, you know?
Yeah, sure, yeah. Like if there was an option to like literally not force them not to do it, but in the case of, we might as well go there now. In the case of carnivorous animals, they might not have that choice. And whilst I agree, whilst I agree that we should take every single action we can prior to the final action being the murder, the actual violation of their entire life. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, I would be in preference of like if we could right now just take lab grown meat and somehow put it out into the wild, and by doing that, you know that you're going to save the lives of all the herbivorous animals that were going to otherwise be killed, etc., etc. I would probably say, yeah, that is a preferable choice to make if we know that that is actually going to prevent rights violations. Because again, you could create such a disturbance in the ecosystem that it could result in more rights violations. And this is something I
More.
have no idea how the hell we're actually going to really know that. And this is just truly a principled discussion. Like it's just an ethical discussion. Like we don't know
Yeah.
what the practical effects of that would be. So it's just hypothetical and assuming. I just still think it's an important discussion to have because this is how we get to understand animal rights and what it actually is about. And the case that's often made is like, you know, like there are Nazis, or there's the hypothetical human apex predator. So there's a predator that's above us, that's in large numbers in society. It's like the equivalent lion for humans, and we know by guarantee for their survival they're going to have to kill humans to survive. Like we just know that as a guarantee. Would you not
Yeah.
then be in favor if it was the only practical option to take their life, knowing that they're going to murder many humans?
If it's the only practical option, of course, yeah.
Yeah, and
So
then but
I, in the name of self-defense, I think
yeah,
that's, you don't even have to go to hypothetical. That's just the laws
that's
of
the
today
reality. Yeah, yeah,
allow you
yeah.
to kill someone in self-defense.
Yeah, and I guess that is the question then. Is like, do you think there are any practical alternatives in the case of carnivorous animals? Then, like, we're going to recognize that
Yeah.
they are violating many animals' rights, and if it were the only option, yes, ethically speaking, killing one animal to prevent the violations of all these other animals, yes, ethically speaking, it's my position that I think, sure, I can agree with that, but I'm not fully convinced that that is the only option, and I don't know. I mean, what are your
Yeah,
thoughts on
I
that?
don't think that's a good option, to be honest. I think there's, first of all, there's a lot of money being invested in the, not invested, but there's a lot of money getting poured into the question of wild animal suffering. There's organizations who work on this
Okay.
issue. I'm talking millions of dollars being
Oh wow,
spent
I
in
didn't know that.
studying wild animal suffering. And the reason for that, I looked into it for a bit because I was surprised at how much money is being spent there. So I
Yeah,
wanted
yeah.
kind of to understand like the issue. So the issue right now is they're trying to understand, first of all, how much suffering is there in the wild, and of course, it's a ridiculously high number, especially
Mm-hmm.
when you think about like marine life, like all the animals in the oceans. The amount of suffering there obviously is ridiculously high. Um, a lot of people who are invested in this field talk about the importance of having this conversation so that if we find a solution, people are on board.
Mm-hmm.
So that people agree, like, yes, wild animal suffering is bad. So that if we find a solution, they're like, oh yeah, I agree, it's bad, so let's go for it. The thing is that there is not a single, even remotely realistic solution ever provided because of the sheer number of individuals suffering and the spaces they are in, like in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean or something. Like, how are you gonna, like,
Mm.
maybe we will be able to intervene in national forest specific parks that are protected where the animals can't escape, so you have like a population that you can actually control. Because if you're going to provide, let's say, lab grown meat to a predator, then you have to make sure that the prey species are not overly like multiplying now because there's no predator. So like there might be a system of either castrating or doing vasectomies on these animals. um, I just think the amount of suffering is so massive, and I agree, obviously it's not a good thing, but I cannot, again, still now imagine or have not come across a single realistic solution that is even close to solving a very small percentage of the amount of suffering.
Sure.
Right? So the one thing people are saying is that we never know what AI might come up with. Maybe AI can come up with the right solution
Yeah.
to end that suffering. And if it happens, I'm on board. I'm on board with reducing suffering, of course. The whole question of like, should we kill them then? I would just ask like, okay, but then should we just kill humans? Like, if yes, then I don't know, like, are we gonna advocate for that now? Who's gonna take us seriously? If not, like, if we don't end up in jail to begin with, and if we're not gonna kill humans, then how are we gonna justify being inconsistent and kill animals but not humans? So that's where I find a struggle with this line of reasoning specifically. I'd much rather people concentrate on like, can we actually find a good solution, rather should we go around and kill them?
Yeah.
Unless if they can come up with a consistent way of also killing humans who are causing a lot of suffering.
I know
And
I know. Trust me, I've been banging my head against the wall with it too, because first of all, it's not even something that I considered for much of my vegan life, to be honest. Just the idea of wild animal suffering, and I think it is an issue that we need to acknowledge because it's immense. And I think it would be inconsistent of us to just say, "Oh, it's nature," though, because we literally argue against nature every day. So it's like that's not a good argument, and I hear that a lot from other vegans. But that's a part of nature. You shouldn't touch it. You know, nature knows best. Just like, no, I shouldn't be having this discussion with you. But that's kind of the position I did take originally. So first of all, I think we need to acknowledge that it is an issue. Like it is horrible what's happening in there, because if humans were in those positions, we would recognize that this is a serious issue. So that's a first step. But yes, like you said, it is extremely complex, and I don't know if we'll have an answer. And that's why you hear the whole idea of culling carnivorous animals come up, because humans are very effective at killing animals in the wild. Like we've exterminated so many animals. But again, I personally am still far from being persuaded in that direction. I just see the logical consistency in a strict hypothetical. Just ethically speaking, I can see it. I'm not denying that argument. I don't see it being practically implemented, and in a way that is actually not resulting in more animal rights violations by disrupting the ecosystem so much. But then, the argument's made that, well, yes, it might disrupt the ecosystem in some circumstances, but it could be studied to the degree that it actually doesn't disrupt it, and you would be helping the herbivorous animals there. So that's why I guess I could say I don't have a strong argument truly against it, other than I'm agnostic on it, because I don't want to cause far more harm than that would otherwise happen. And there's also a big irrational part of me where I'm like, I don't want to go out and just murder animals, even if you could prove to me that it would be it would be in favor of animal rights. Like, it's such it's a head fuck topic to me, but it is an issue that needs to be discussed, I still believe.
It's also important to note that, like, just because something is logically consistent doesn't necessarily mean it's good, right? Like, I can see the consistency stands, but consistency itself does not inherently mean it's correct, because technically a non-vegan can say, like, or like, let's say, someone can say, oh, actually a lot of vegans say, oh, you can't kill animals, but then you eat them. Well, a hunter is logically consistent because they eat animals and they kill them as well. But that doesn't mean
absolutely,
that what they're doing is correct.
Sorry, when I did say logically consistent, I was saying I was mostly in reference of it being logically consistent with animal rights, because I know people can be logically consistent in the complete opposite direction of pure evil. So I do understand that completely.
Even if we talk about animal rights, so can it be consistent with animal rights if you believe animals should have basic moral rights? Is it consistent to to violate their right and kill them.
If it results in
Because
less, well, the
then,
same could be said for humans. I would, to play devil's advocate here, I would say that
yeah,
there are humans that we grant rights that violate the rights of others, and therefore we should intervene and violate their right because the amount of harm that they're causing, that would be
yeah.
the legal system and putting them in jail.
But we usually do that with humans who have moral agency.
Right. But then I guess the question
We
would be, even if they
that,
didn't have moral agency, we still find some type of consequence to prevent them from doing that, if that means disrupting their
yeah,
freedom to some degree.
yeah, I agree. That's right. That's right. If it's a tiring topic because it's like it's one where we don't really have the best answers,
Sure.
right? You don't want to go around kill, but you also don't want to see them kill. It's like, what
I
do
know,
you do?
I know.
My main issue with the culling thing is if you're gonna go that far, start with humans because we're the ones who create the most. Like, okay, I'm saying it as an expression, but the amount of suffering that we create is absolutely crazy as well. So
Sure.
if we are gonna say that a creature harming and creating suffering on others should be killed, then why not humans as well?
And that's
then
that's
yeah,
Effilism, isn't
that's
it? It's like, well, if we're always going to be violating the rights of others, I guess that the argument against that is that, well, we can legally create a world where that is prevented as much as possible, and that's kind of what we are doing with human rights. And in the case
yeah,
of animals that lack a high degree of moral agency, a legal system just couldn't work in that way. So therefore, it's just not an option. But I still completely understand what you're saying. Essentially, this argument could lead to truly to Effilism, where we just deny sentient existence. So yeah, although I'm not strong in that position. I mean, I heard an interview the other day that someone that's in favor of culling carnivorous animals, but they're not in favor of Effilism, and I can't remember the actual argument that they made, but it was
yeah,
still
that would be
persuasive to a
interesting to see.
degree. It was persuasive. I think it was actually between
Yeah.
Rafaela and Richard. Actually, do you know Rafaela, the militant vegan?
No.
Do you, have you heard of her?
The
She's
she's an activist
Austrian.
from Germany, I think.
Yeah, Germany. Yeah, Austria,
Austrian,
Germany.
right. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
I've seen her work. Yeah.
Yeah, it was I think I forget the specifics, but I found it interesting. Anyway, to just put that to rest for now, it is a very, very complex topic, and it shouldn't take away from everything that we can do practically now, by living vegan. And
Yes.
like don't let this make veganism futile or whatever it is. It is definitely the obvious practical step that we can all take, and then becoming activists and trying to convince other humans as far as possible, and creating a world where animals have the legal rights the same as humans. And then we can start to deal with that issue. I mean, we can start dealing with the wild animal issue right now. Like you said, we're putting money into it. It's just the solutions aren't as practical as it is for humans.
Yeah.
Yeah, oh, and the
I
animals
mean,
that we're exploiting.
I hope we end up finding a solution that would be the ideal. I just find it very, very difficult to imagine what that would be like, but we'll
Sure,
see. Maybe AI will help us.
I hope so too. Anyway, man, I think that can kind of sum up for tonight. I really, really appreciate having this conversation with you. I've learnt a lot. Hopefully, we can do it again in the near future, because I'm sure there's many more topics that we could talk about. But are there any things that you want to say before we finish up?
Um, yeah, if you do advocacy outreach, please make sure to check out MiddleEastVeganSociety.org and use the Vegan Islam Guide if you come across a person who's Muslim, and if you don't have the right answers, send them that way. That would be really helpful. So other than that, yeah, I think one thing I would like to say is remind people the importance of reading the literature on animal rights. I think it's one of the most helpful things. And I think one of the main reasons there are so many ex-vegans or people not understanding what veganism is because people tend to go vegan. They watch a few YouTube videos, they see Instagram recipes, now they're vegan. Whereas there's a whole actual philosophy behind this, where if they just go that far, they look into that part, which is the most important part, then there wouldn't be so many ex-vegans and
Yeah,
people who don't understand. It's
completely agree.
nice.
And that was a big theme of what we've talked about tonight. It's really understanding the core message, and then everything
Yeah.
extends from there. You're just trying to logically extend from that core understanding, which is often misunderstood. Literally, I think you could point at any vegan that you come across and get them to describe what it actually means to be an animal rights activist, and maybe we wouldn't even have consistent views on that. So I think it is super important that we all clarify on that. Yeah. All right. Thank you
Yeah.
so much, man. I'm gonna end the live stream for
Thanks,
you.
man.
I won't hang up on you straight away, but thank you everybody for watching this. I hope you all learnt a lot, and it's a bit annoying that the live stream cut out halfway through, but I've recorded the full discussion so I can post that afterwards. All right. Thank you, everybody.
Perfect.